I'm Eric Rosales. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, high-stakes trip. President Biden is at the G20 summit in Brazil amid a flurry of foreign policy issues and Ukraine's first launch of U.S.-supplied missiles into Russia. Crackdown by China. Dozens of pro-democracy advocates in Hong Kong are sentenced for breaking the Beijing-backed national security law. School choice. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill consider a measure that could make it more affordable to send your children to Catholic schools. Plus, read all about it. Pope Francis releases a new book ahead of the Jubilee year. These stories and much more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
And thank you for being with us. I'm Eric Rosales in for Tracy Sabol. Our top story tonight. The war in Ukraine is officially 1,000 days old, and it's escalating. As we reported, President Joe Biden just eased restrictions on Ukraine's use of long-range U.S. missiles against Russia. And now it appears Ukraine has already fired those missiles. For the very latest now, let's turn to White House correspondent Owen Jensen. Owen.
Eric, good evening to you. The reported use of the Army Tactical Missile System, or ATACMS, came as Russian President Vladimir Putin formally lowered Russia's threshold for using nuclear weapons.
This video reportedly shows U.S.-supplied ATACMS missiles being launched from Ukraine. Moscow says Ukraine fired 6 longer-range missiles at Russia's Bryansk region, shooting most of them down. The U.S. State Department responded to the latest developments.
I am not going to confirm that report. Ukraine, of course, is free to speak to what they have or have not done, but I'm not going to confirm at this point any U.S. policy change.
Earlier today, a third Russian strike in as many days on a residential area in Ukraine killed at least 12 people, including a child. The strike hit a school dormitory. Rescuers digging through the rubble.
So when you look at whatever happens with the outcome of this war, it has already been a massive strategic failure for Russia. Hundreds of thousands of casualties.
A turning point may be coming with U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. In 2 months, he moves into the White House. He has pledged to swiftly end the war. Speaking via video, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed a European Union Parliament session today in Brussels, warning,
Putin is focused on winning this war. He will not stop on his own. The more time he has, the worse the conditions become.
Meanwhile, in South America, leaders of the world's 20 major economies met for the second day of the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. They issued a joint declaration calling for the end of the war in Ukraine, more aid for Gaza, and a global pact to combat hunger. President Joe Biden also issued this warning.
This is the single greatest existential threat to humanity if we do not deal with climate change.
Now, since Putin sent troops into Ukraine, he and other Russian voices have frequently threatened the West with Russia's nuclear arsenal to discourage it from ramping up support for Kyiv. And as of tonight, the war there continues unabated. Eric?
Thank you so much, Owen. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office says the hush money case against President-elect Donald Trump will not be dropped, but adds consideration must be given to freeze the case until Trump is out of the White House. Prosecutors say that they will oppose any effort to dismiss the recent conviction. The president-elect's lawyers have been fighting for months to reverse his conviction of falsifying business records. Trump is due to be sentenced on November 26. The judge has not set a timetable for his decision. The United Nations Nuclear Watchdog Group is sounding the alarm after over Iran, that is. It says Tehran has increased its stockpile of uranium to near weapons-grade levels, and it's not following international demands to stop. The news comes as the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency visits Tehran. Iranian officials claim the nuclear program is for peaceful purposes only. It is a critical time in the region. The country has traded missile attacks with Israel, and officials are preparing for the second coming of administration of President-elect Donald Trump. Now to Beirut, where a U.S. envoy is meeting with officials in the hopes of reaching a ceasefire deal between Israel and the militant group Hezbollah. A White House advisor says progress is being made.
We have continued to narrow the gaps through the discussions over the last few weeks, and specifically today we continued to significantly narrow the gaps. So the meeting was very constructive and very helpful.
Meanwhile, an Israeli strike killed at least 5 people in Beirut, just a short distance from the prime minister's office. This is the third strike in the Lebanese capital in 2 days. At the same time, an Israeli airstrike in northern Gaza has left more than a dozen people dead in the same family. Now, this comes as the U.S. opposes sanctions on organizations involved in the illegal West Bank settlement, and this includes a well-established Israeli group. In Hong Kong, a crushing blow is dealt to the pro-democracy movement as dozens of activists and ex-lawmakers are sentenced to prison. They will serve anywhere from 4 to 10 years. They were prosecuted under a Beijing-imposed law for their roles in the unofficial primary election. 47 were accused overall, but 2 were acquitted earlier this year. And joining us now is Bill McGurn from the Wall Street Journal and godfather of the pro-democracy advocate Jimmy Lai. Bill, thank you so much for joining us. There's no
you're
doubt.
welcome.
Thank you so much, sir. There's no doubt that you've been watching what's unfolding out there in Hong Kong today. And can you walk us through more about this Beijing-imposed law that was used?
Yeah. The problem this week, we have 2 big events. The sentencing of 45 democracy advocates who held an unofficial primary. And they got sentences ranging from 4 years to 10 years for the guy they called the leader. The other big thing is Jimmy Lai's trial continues starting tomorrow, Wednesday. And we'll see what happens. I think no one's in doubt about the outcome, but we'll see what sentence he gets.
And how severe was this blow to the morale of the people there?
Well, I think everyone expected it, but this is, marks a further destruction of the Hong Kong we all know and love. It was a remarkably free Chinese society. I think Sun Yat-sen had said it was the freest Chinese people had ever known. One friend of mine who was a journalist, much older than me, is no longer with us. He said Hong Kong achieved under British rule what no Chinese society had ever achieved before: freedom from the midnight knock on the door.
Yeah, no kidding.
And it produced a lot of people like Jimmy Lai, and a guy who came to Hong Kong penniless on a boat and ended up being a billionaire. There are a lot of stories like that because it reeked of opportunity and the rule of law. And now it's all gone.
Yeah, you mentioned the trial tomorrow. Talk to us a little bit about what effect this could have in Jimmy Lai's trial.
What effect? What, the sentencing today?
The sentencing today.
They deliberately moved the sentence up to be the day before his trial. I don't know why, except to set an example and say Jimmy Lai is not being singled out. We're going after a lot of people. However, they present him like he's Osama bin Laden, and where he's really just a newspaper publisher. And they're really mad at him because he wouldn't plead guilty.
Right.
He spent 4 years in jail almost right now, and he's going to have a say when he takes a stand.
And President-elect Donald Trump has said that he intends to free Lai. Where are we at on that, realistically?
Well, realistically, it's good to have the president on your side. He promised you in a podcast that he would get Jimmy out. He said it would be easy. I don't know if it's easy, but it is something that China could do without a lot of cost to itself. I mean, China is now being held responsible for Hong Kong's actions, these trials and so forth, at a time when you have a new administration coming in that wants to take a much tougher line with China. Jimmy Lai is a pretty good thing to give up. They could give up with not that much. The chief executive of Hong Kong, the equivalent of the British governor, he's under U.S. sanctions, and so are a lot of other officials, and they're talking about more. Maybe they could do a trade with some of these people in jail for lifting sanctions. I don't know, but I think there's a good case for letting them out, especially Jimmy. He's 75 and a diabetic. Yeah. They don't want him to die in jail.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
In other news, in a book released today ahead of the 2025 Jubilee, Pope Francis addresses the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the worldwide migration issue, underscoring the importance of respecting human dignity and always maintaining hope. EWTN Vatican journalist Benedict Settergren has more.
In anticipation of the 2025 Jubilee, a new book about Pope Francis is being released today. Hope Never Disappoints, Pilgrims Toward a Better World, is on sale in Italy, Spain, and Latin America. It is based on interviews with the Holy Father where he addresses current issues such as family, the climate crisis, new technologies, and peace. Migration is one of the Pope's top priorities.
He emphasizes that it is impossible to think about migration without also considering climate change, the current economic system, and its political consequences. He insists that addressing migration cannot be done in isolation because the interconnection between these factors is absolute. For the Pope, migration serves as a lens through which to view the broader realities of what is happening in the world today.
It needs to be said clearly. There are those who systematically work by all means to drive away migrants, and this, when done knowingly and deliberately, is a grave sin.
Referring to the war in Ukraine in his book, the Holy Father praises the acceptance of refugees in Europe. He also discusses the Israel-Hamas war and calls for an investigation to look into claims that Israel's military operations in Gaza might constitute genocide.
The Pope isn't taking a stance on whether genocide is happening or not. Instead, he's emphasizing the importance of an investigation. He suggests that if there are claims of genocide, a thorough investigation is required to determine whether the conditions for genocide criteria A, B, C, and D are met. If these conditions are fulfilled in the current circumstances within that region, it would then require a formal declaration by the international community.
As the 2025 Jubilee is approaching, Pope Francis includes an invitation to be pilgrims of hope and recalls that hope must be the anchor and the sail that guide us toward a more fraternal future.
The Pope says the key word is hope, which he contrasts not only with despair, but also with mere optimism. Optimism, he explains, can be fleeting. Here one moment, gone the next. Hope, especially Christian hope, is different. It's not just a theological virtue, but also a mindset rooted in the certainty that something good is coming. At the same time, this hope requires action. It's not passive. We are called to work at building hope each day, to make it a reality through our efforts.
In Rome, Benedict Settergren, EWTN News Nightly.
Florida's Attorney General has now sued the Federal Emergency Management Agency after a former employee of FEMA instructed workers to avoid homes with Donald Trump campaign signs during hurricane relief efforts. Today, the FEMA director was up on Capitol Hill defending her agency and denouncing the latest scandal.
This type of behavior and action will not be tolerated at FEMA, and we will hold people accountable if they violate our standards of conduct.
Last week, FEMA fired Supervisor Marnie Washington for what it called, quote, a clear violation of FEMA's core values and principles. But Washington says she's being used as a scapegoat.
You have someone with a clean record that comes highly recommended, and then you have someone that's been demoted in the past for egregious acts, yet you retain this person and promote them, but yet fire me and basically leave me out to be scrutinized and lie and tell the American people I was working on my own volition.
She claims she was merely following protocol in directing FEMA workers to avoid potentially hostile political encounters which happened before at houses with Trump signs.
Does the investigation include her immediate supervisors and several steps above them?
The investigation includes those that were deployed in this particular incident, and we have found no evidence that there is anything beyond this one employee's specific direction.
FEMA officials say this was an isolated incident.
I do not believe that this employee's actions are indicative of any widespread cultural problems at FEMA.
Some added President-elect Donald Trump and his allies boosted misinformation claims, including eligibility for FEMA relief funds.
The misinformation regarding FEMA was a real distraction. It was unnecessary. A lot of time was spent on combating that false information rather than encouraging people to sign up.
The people of Western North Carolina are tired. The grief that they're experiencing is compounded by bureaucratic missteps, delays, and poor communication.
Meanwhile, the Biden administration is urging Congress to pass nearly $100 billion more for FEMA to deal with the destruction from the hurricanes and wildfires across the nation and to help fund repairs for the bridge collapse near Baltimore. Well, we have a lot more still ahead on EWTN News Nightly, including a new bill that aims to expand school choice for children, how it could make it much easier for your kids to attend Catholic schools. And a traditional rite of passage is going deeper, what a group of Catholic churches is doing to enrich a quinceañera. And welcome back. As President-elect Donald Trump prepares to return to office in January, he has made more picks to his cabinet. He is naming former Wisconsin Representative Sean Duffy for his nominee as Transportation Secretary. Duffy, who is Catholic, served in the House for almost 9 years. He was a member of the Financial Services Committee and was chairman of the Subcommittee on Insurance and Housing. He resigned from Congress in 2019 to spend more time with his wife and children ahead of the birth of his 9th child. Since serving in Congress, Duffy has been co-host on the Fox News channel. Duffy says that, or Trump that is, says that Duffy will maintain and rebuild the nation's infrastructure and will, quote, greatly elevate the travel experience for all Americans. Trump also announced that he will pick billionaire and transition advisor Howard Lutnick for Commerce Secretary. A Wyoming judge has ruled 2 of the state's abortion bans are unconstitutional. For now, the decision means the procedure is legally up until fetal viability, which generally means at what point a baby can live outside the womb. The first law prohibited abortion entirely, with exceptions involving rape and incest. The second law banned all methods of abortion. Judge Melissa Owens wrote, the 2 statutes suspend a woman's right to make her own health care decisions during an entire term of her pregnancy. The case may be appealed to the Wyoming Supreme Court. A pro-life group is asking the U.S. Supreme Court to throw out buffer zones laws in Illinois. Coalition Life says the measures impede its peaceful protests and counseling outside abortion clinics, that is, in Carbondale, Illinois. The court is expected to decide whether to hear the case by Friday. And in Washington, D.C., a new bill, if passed, could make it more affordable to send your children to Catholic schools and other religious institutions. It's called the Educational Choice for Children's Act of 2024. It will support low-income students through charitable contributions and scholarship funds. The bill passed the Ways and Means Committee back in September and is awaiting to be brought to the floor for a vote. And joining us now is the author of the new legislation, Nebraska Republican Congressman Adrian Smith. Congressman Smith, thank you so much for joining us. The Educational Choice for Children's Act would expand educational freedom for parents of young kids and even allow parents to be able to use it for parochial school and other Catholic schools, correct?
Well, absolutely. We know that there's actually a very viable and productive infrastructure across the country in so many communities that we know there's quality education out there, but we want to make sure that there's more access.
And how specifically would this bill generate new investments in scholarships for K through 12 tuition and educational resources?
Well, this would be a tax credit that would enable the formation of what are called scholarship granting organizations. And those can be formed based on specific needs of a part of a community or a state. And it's really, I think the beauty of the program is that it's ultimately locally driven. It's not the federal government saying what's best. It is simply some federal resources, perhaps, that ultimately empower families to make decisions in the best interest of their children.
Well, we've seen through the success of other school choice initiatives across the country how parents are really empowered and the freedom to decide where to send their kids to school, even for religious institutions like parochial schools. And this could really make a difference in a child's life, correct?
That's right. And we see, very strong numbers that when there's access to more parental input, it is absolutely vital that, I think it's vital that we provide more access or enable more access. And it's important to note as well that this effort at the federal level is in concert with efforts at various state level operations as well.
Wonderful. And how many kids could actually be affected by this?
The estimates are well over 300,000.
Wow.
And when you look at what the needs are, and I'll tell you what, I have talked to some of the youth who have been positively impacted by school choice. Boy, they make a compelling argument that we need to do more for enabling and empowering more access to these resources because the outcomes are so positive.
And this past committee, the Ways and Means Committee, I believe, back in September. So what's exactly next for this? Could we see this maybe tacked on to something at the end of this year, or would it be next Congress?
Well, we've got a lot of things to do between now and the end of the year. That remains to be seen, but I really appreciate the feedback from so many folks across the country.
Well, we at EWTN News Nightly are certainly going to be following this bill very closely. Nebraska Republican Congressman Adrian Smith, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
South Carolina Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace says that she'll be introducing a bill to ban transgender women from using biological women's restrooms at the U.S. Capitol. Her announcement comes as Representative-elect Sarah McBride prepares to take office as the first transgender person elected to Congress. Congresswoman Mace says that she is standing up for women and restoring a bit of sanity to Capitol Hill.
This is a biological man. He does not belong in women's spaces, women's bathrooms, locker rooms, changing rooms, period, full stop. I am not going to allow that kind of thing to happen, not up here on the Capitol and not anywhere across the country.
McBride fired back on social media, saying that this was an attempt to distract from the real problems Americans are facing. Speaker Mike Johnson addressed the issue as well.
For anybody who doesn't know my well-established record on this issue, let me be unequivocally clear. A man is a man, and a woman is a woman, and a man cannot become a woman.
He adds everyone will be treated with dignity. If the measure does pass, its management would fall under the jurisdiction of Sergeant at Arms, which is the chief law enforcement officer at the U.S. House of Representatives. Up next on EWTN News Nightly, traditional Quinceañera is getting a whole new look. What one group is doing to make the beloved rite of passage a spiritual tool of growth. Finally tonight, many cultures around the world have a celebration for young women as they turn 15. For Hispanics, it's called a quinceañera. And now one group is offering a program to help young women in their understanding of femininity from a Catholic perspective. Quinceañera, created for God, launched earlier this month in Denver. It's an 8-week program run by local parishes. When a family asks for Mass or a blessing as part of their daughter's quinceañera celebration, the parish is now offering the formation program as well. The head of the new program says that she hopes that it'll bring an element of faith formation to a once-in-a-lifetime celebration. And for more on that, let's turn to Janet Chavez, Director of Magnifica, the Spanish language outreach of the Quinceañera Formation Program. Janet, thank you so much for being with us. First off, how many young women in the U.S. each year have a quinceañera with a Catholic element?
Thank you. As you mentioned, we just launched the program this past November 7th. And while creating this program, we've hosted many pilot groups in Colorado, California, and recently in the state of Washington, serving over 200 women.
Beautiful. And tell us why you started this program, what it's all about.
We had our local auxiliary bishop, Jorge Rodriguez, reach out to us, expressing an urgent need for formation for quinceañeras. These families and young women approach the church year after year asking for a blessing or a Mass, but they often come as cultural non-practicing Catholics. So this is an opportunity for us to reach out and evangelize a group of women who are coming back to the church.
Yeah, and this is more than just a few-day program. This is an 8-week program, and it's bilingual, and it gives a fourth faith formation as well, doesn't it?
Exactly. It is 8 to 10 weeks. It allows the parishes to host these young women week by week in a 2-hour meeting. And through these meetings, the girls get to read and learn more about the elements of the tradition of the Quinceañera. They learn about their identity as women through the teachings of the Catholic Church, and also learn from the lives of the saints and how they can apply their testimony to what they're currently facing.
And what's been the response so far? I mean, quite a few people are interested in the program.
Yes, we have over 60 parishes and dioceses already asking to bring this formation program to their parish. And as the creator, I've been able to host many pilot groups, and I've seen a lot of fruit.
And if viewers want more information on this, where can they go?
They can visit us at endowgroups.org or magnificagrupos.org.
All right. Well, Janeth Chavez, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we want to thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, X, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Eric Rosales. Have yourself a wonderful night, and God bless.